Welcome to the channel. Hit subscribe and dive into stories that'll stay with you long after the video ends. Let's begin. The first scream didn't sound human. It tore through the mansion's west wing like a jagged blade of sound, snapping Alina Hart awake. She bolted upright in the antique bed, heart pounding against her ribs, breath thin in the cold air. For a moment she didn't move. She only listened. Silence, but not a peaceful kind. A dense, watching silence, the kind that sits heavy on the walls of old places. Alina pushed aside the velvet covers and stepped onto the polished floor. "Hello." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "Is someone here?" Nothing answered. Only the faint, distant hum of the old estate's heating system, and beneath it, a soft tremor, like a vibration traveling through the walls. She followed it down the hallway, bare feet whispering across the runner rug. The portraits, stern ancestors with oil-painted eyes, seemed to track her as she passed. At the end of the corridor, the air smelled faintly of dust and cold stone. She hesitated at the door to the west wing. Her grandmother had always kept it locked, always insisted that part of the mansion was unsafe, structurally unstable, she'd said, off limits. But Alina now owned the house, inherited after the funeral 2 weeks ago. And tonight the west wing felt like it was breathing. When she turned the brass handle, the door groaned open. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, dim and unmoving, lit only by the moon filtering through cracked windows. The floorboards creaked beneath her, sharp and brittle, carrying her weight like a secret. "Grandmother," she whispered into the cold. She knew it was impossible, yet the question left her lips anyway. A pulse of air brushed her cheek, a draft or something else. She followed it toward the far end of the wing, where a tall cabinet stood crooked against the wall. The vibration was stronger there, soft but persistent. Like a heartbeat on the other side, Alina reached out and touched the cabinet door. It rattled. She jerked her hand back, pulse surging. Then she steadied herself, set her jaw, and opened it. Shelves, old linens, a stack of yellowed newspapers, nothing that could make a sound. But the vibration continued behind it. She pressed her palm to the back panel. The wood felt wrong, warmer than it should be. She ran her fingers along the edges until she found it, a tiny gap, nearly invisible unless you were searching. The panel shifted when she pushed. A hollow click echoed down the hallway. Alina froze. The back of the cabinet slid open 3 inches, revealing a black seam of space. A hidden passage, her breath caught in her throat. The scream she'd heard suddenly made terrible sense. Something had come from behind this wall. She eased the panel wider. Cold air spilled out, raw and metallic. The smell of stone, untouched for decades. She raised her phone, thumb trembling as she turned on the flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the mansion's foundation. Walls of rough-cut stone, dust swirling in the light like disturbed ash. Something shifted below, a soft scrape, a breath that wasn't hers. Alina stepped back, heart hammering, the darkness below pulling at her like a hand curling around her ankle. She should close it, call someone, leave the house entirely. But she didn't. She swallowed hard and whispered, "What were you hiding down there, Grandma?" Then she placed her foot on the first step and descended into the cold. The air grew colder with each step Alina took, as if the stone swallowed warmth the way a well swallows light. Her phone's beam flickered across the spiral staircase, catching motes of dust and tiny scratches in the walls, scratches that looked deliberate. She traced one with her fingertip. A single word carved into the stone: "Stay." Her breath stuttered. The gouges were recent. "Grandma, what did you do down here?" she whispered. No answer came, only the distant drip of water somewhere far below. She tightened her grip on the phone and continued downward. The staircase ended at a narrow landing, opening into a long corridor braced with wooden beams, their surfaces gray with age. A thick curtain of cobwebs stretched across the entrance, and she had to brush them aside, flinching as the threads clung to her skin. A smell rose from the darkness, old earth mixed with something metallic, something that prickled the back of her throat. She stepped forward. Her phone illuminated old tiles beneath her feet, patterns, shapes, symbols she didn't recognize. The walls were covered in them too, painted in faded red like ancient warnings. A whisper of movement drifted from up ahead. Alina froze. "Hello," she called, her voice thin. Something answered her with silence, and then, so faint she almost doubted it, a soft inhale. As if someone was trying not to breathe. Her heartbeat stuttered painfully. She moved her light to the left, then the right, catching only shadows. The corridor bent sharply, and as she rounded the corner, the space opened into a chamber, a secret cellar. Her grandmother had lived in this mansion for 90 years, yet never once had she spoken of anything below the west wing. The room was circular, its walls lined with shelves packed full of glass jars, notebooks, and strange instruments. Dust coated everything except for one table in the center, smooth, clean, recently disturbed. Alina approached it slowly. Laid out neatly on the table were several black and white photographs, all of the mansion, some from decades ago, some from just months before her grandmother died. The last photo made her breath catch. It was a picture of the cabinet upstairs, the same one that hid this passage. But there in the corner of the photograph was a shadow, a figure, tall, indistinct. Facing the camera, her hands trembled. "This isn't possible." She turned one of the notebooks toward her. It was filled with her grandmother's handwriting, thin looping script she recognized instantly. But the words weren't recipes or old family notes. They were observations, dates, times, sightings. "He watches from the walls. He moves between rooms when the lights go out. Do not let him near the west wing door." Alina's stomach knotted. A soft click echoed behind her. She spun around, raising the light, and her voice caught in her throat. Someone stood at the far edge of the chamber, a child. A boy no older than 10, barefoot, pale, dressed in clothing that looked decades out of place. His eyes glowed faintly in the beam of the phone, wide, frightened, yet strangely calm. He whispered, "You shouldn't be down here." Alina stepped back, pulse thundering. "Who are you? How did you get inside this house?" The boy shook his head slowly. "I never left." Her blood turned cold. Before she could ask another question, the boy's gaze darted to the passage behind her, and his voice dipped to a trembling whisper. "He's coming." Alina's pulse slammed through her ears. "Who's coming?" she whispered, but the boy only backed toward the shadows, shaking his head as if speaking the name would summon the thing itself. A faint groan rose from the corridor she'd walked through, a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across stone. The temperature plunged. Her breath fogged in the air. "Stay with me," Alina pleaded, stepping toward the boy. "Tell me what's happening." But he retreated farther, almost melting into the darkness. "I can't," he murmured. "He listens." The dragging grew louder. Alina swept her flashlight toward the passage, but the beam sputtered, dimmed, then steadied. Something disturbed the dust at the threshold, a subtle shift, as if unseen feet slid across the floor. She backed against the table, gripping its edge until her knuckles whitened. A shadow stretched slowly across the wall, long, wrong, bending at angles that didn't match any human movement. The boy gasped and pressed both hands over his mouth. Alina forced herself to speak. "Grandma wrote about someone in the walls. Is that who you mean?" The shadow stopped. The dragging ceased. Silence pooled in the chamber, thick as oil. The boy shook his head violently. "Not someone." His eyes lifted and locked onto hers with a despair far too old for his small frame. "Something." The word throbbed in the air like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the lights on her phone flickered again, and for a single second the corridor flashed into view, revealing a figure standing at the bend. A figure so tall its head brushed the ceiling. Its limbs hung too long, joints slightly twisted as if forced into the shape of a man. The light died to a dim circle. Alina staggered back, hand over her mouth. "No!" A deep cracking sound echoed like bones shifting. Then a breath, a long, rattling exhale that fluttered the cobwebs overhead. The boy whispered, "He's been waiting." The figure's shadow moved. Alina turned and grabbed one of the notebooks, no plan, just instinct. She clutched it as if the thin paper could protect her. The table shook slightly under her hands, and she realized she was trembling. "Why me?" she forced out. "Why now?" "You opened the way," the boy said. "He can't leave the room unless the door is opened, the real door, not the one upstairs." Her mind raced. The hidden cabinet, the panel. She had unlocked something her grandmother had spent a lifetime sealing away. The figure stepped forward. Alina darted around the table. The chamber had another exit. She'd noticed a smaller archway opposite the main corridor, half covered by fallen beams. She sprinted toward it. The boy remained where he was, eyes wide, sorrowful. "I can't follow. I'm bound here." "What do you mean bound?" she asked, panting. He swallowed, tears trembling at his lashes. "She tried to save me," he whispered. "Your grandmother tried." Another step from the corridor. Stone grated beneath enormous weight. Alina squeezed through the narrow archway, scraping her shoulders on rough stone. Her flashlight beam jittered across a cramped passage, a secondary tunnel lined with rusted pipes and ancient brickwork. Behind her, the boy called softly, "Don't look back." She didn't. She ran. The tunnel dipped sharply, the floor slick with moisture. The walls pressed tight around her, but she pushed forward, breath ragged, every sense screaming that the thing behind her was moving. Slow, deliberate, certain. A distant thud reverberated through the tunnel, followed by another, closer this time. Heavy, purposeful. Then a voice drifted down the passage, cold and gravelly, scraping like stone against stone. "Eleanor," it hissed, tasting her name. Her blood iced. She stumbled deeper into the dark, knowing there was only one direction left: forward into whatever secrets her grandmother died trying to bury. The tunnel narrowed until Eleanor had to duck, her shoulders grazing both walls at once. The air tasted of rust and stale water. Every few steps, droplets fell from the ceiling and struck the ground with soft taps that echoed far too loudly. Behind her, the voice called again. Eleanor, drawn out, hungry. She forced herself onward, one hand braced against the damp brick. Her phone light jittered as her fingers trembled, but she kept it steady enough to see the path ahead, until the tunnel suddenly opened into a low chamber reinforced with thick iron bars along the walls. Like a cell, or a cage. Eleanor slowed, chest heaving. The chamber smelled of wet iron and old fear. A metal cot rested in the corner, rust eating through its frame. Beside it lay a chain, snapped at the midpoint as though wrenched apart by something far stronger than human hands. Her stomach tightened. A faint scraping whisper drifted along the stones. She spun toward the noise and froze. A set of initials was carved into the cot's headboard. Simple. Shaky. E.H. Her own initials. She touched the engraving, breath catching. No, this can't be right. But another carving glimmered just below it. A date. Faded but unmistakable, 1953. Her grandmother would have been a young woman then. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the rusted metal and she whispered, "Did you know something was coming even back then?" A soft creak broke the moment. A door, one she hadn't noticed, sat recessed into the stone wall at the far end of the chamber. Its metal frame bolted into the rock. The door vibrated gently as if something on the other side breathed against it. Her grandmother had built cages, hidden rooms, sealed doors deep beneath the mansion, to trap something, to contain it, or to protect the world above. Eleanor stepped closer. The metal was cold beneath her palm, too cold. She pulled back with a flinch. Then the breathing stopped. A single knock tapped on the other side, slow, deliberate. She staggered back. No, I'm not opening anything else. Not again. But as she turned, her light caught something above the door. A message painted in dark pigment, the letters uneven and smeared. "If this door opens, run." The paint wasn't old, not decades, maybe months. Her grandmother had been alive then, trying to leave warnings, trying to buy time. A tremendous thud shook the chamber. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The bolts on the door quivered. "Eleanor," the voice seeped through the metal, thicker now, closer. "Don't run." She backed toward the tunnel she'd come from, but an icy wind rushed from its depths, freezing her breath in her throat. She had no idea how it was possible, wind in a sealed underground passage, but the message was clear. It wanted her cornered. A metallic snap cracked through the air. One of the bolts on the door had snapped loose. Eleanor darted toward the opposite wall, searching anything, any way out, and spotted a narrow gap between two collapsed beams. It wasn't a doorway. It wasn't meant for people. But it was her only chance. She dropped to her knees and crawled, splinters biting into her palms, stones scraping her back as she wriggled through. Her phone clattered ahead of her, casting shaky light across the cramped space. Behind her, the iron door groaned and opened. The rush of cold air hit like a slap. A deep, rattling inhale filled the chamber she'd just escaped, as though something enormous had just taken its first breath in decades. Eleanor shoved herself the last few inches, tumbling onto the other side of the beams. She grabbed her phone and ran blindly. The tunnel ahead sloped upward. The air warmed. The stones changed from ancient brick to polished marble. She stumbled forward, confused, until she recognized the pattern in the walls. She wasn't underground anymore. She was inside the mansion again, somewhere she had never seen. Eleanor steadied herself against the smooth marble wall, gasping. The air up here was warmer, stagnant, but breathable. Yet it carried a faint vibration, as though the mansion itself trembled with something waking beneath it. Her flashlight swept across the hallway, tall ceilings, dusty chandeliers, faded wallpaper patterned with vines curling toward a distant door, a part of the house sealed off long before she was born. She took one step forward. The floor creaked, not with age but with pressure, as though someone else moved in perfect rhythm beneath her feet. "Eleanor," the voice rose from the floorboards, drifting up through the cracks like cold fog. She swallowed a scream, pressed her back against the wall, and forced her breathing to steady. "You're not real," she whispered. "You don't belong here." But the voice only exhaled, long and rasping. "I was here first." The lights above her flickered weakly. She moved down the corridor, each footstep echoing too loudly. Her phone's beam caught another door, a large wooden one, its surface scratched deeply with the same symbols she'd seen carved in the stone below. Her grandmother's handwriting was etched subtly into the frame, 4 small words chiseled with desperate precision. "This is the truth." Eleanor hesitated, hand hovering over the door's brass handle. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed to rattle her ribs, but something inside her, the same instinct that had pushed her down the hidden stairs, drove her forward. She turned the handle. The room beyond was bathed in a cold gray glow pouring through a single high window. Dust swirled in soft waves, shifting with the air like restless spirits. Books lay stacked in towering piles, and the scent of old paper filled the space. At the room's center stood a large oak desk. On it lay a leather-bound journal, its pages crinkled from age and use. Her grandmother's final journal. Eleanor forced her feet to carry her closer. She opened the first page. "He came when I was a girl, a shadow in the walls, a whisper in the bone. He feeds on fear, on memory, on bloodlines. He cannot die, he can only be passed on." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Passed on." Another entry written in a shaking hand. "I bound him with the boy's help. I hid the room. I sealed every door I could, but the bond transfers with death. Forgive me, Eleanor, I had no time." Her knees weakened. "No, Grandma, why didn't you tell me?" A cold hand brushed her shoulder. She spun around, but nothing stood there, only drifting dust. Then the window darkened. A towering silhouette filled the glass, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its head cocked as though curious. The air thickened with its presence. Shadows bled down the walls. Eleanor backed away, clutching the journal to her chest. The voice seeped through the room like oil. "Your grandmother kept me hungry. You opened the way." Tears stung her eyes, but rage flickered beneath them, sharp, fierce, startling her with its heat. "You don't get to take this house," she whispered. "You don't get to take me." She flipped to the last page of the journal, scanning until her gaze landed on a final note, short, desperate. "Light, heat. The West Wing furnace. It's the only thing he fears." The creature pressed a hand to the window. The glass creaked beneath its weight. Eleanor bolted from the room. The hall vibrated as the thing followed, crawling through shadow, its limbs scraping across walls, its voice curling around her like smoke. She sprinted toward the West Wing, toward the furnace room she'd only ever glanced at in childhood. Her grandmother had always warned her away from it. Now she understood why. She reached the rusted furnace door, hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the journal. She threw it open. Inside, embers still glowed faintly, as if someone had tended them not long ago. Her grandmother's final protection. The creature rounded the corner behind her, filling the hallway with darkness. Eleanor seized a fallen lantern from the shelf, smashed it against the furnace, and flames roared alive. The heat surged. The creature shrieked, its first true sound, recoiling as the firelight struck it. Eleanor stepped forward, tears streaking down her face, voice breaking. "This ends with me." She hurled the burning lantern at its feet. Flames erupted, darkness dissolved, and the mansion exhaled. When the smoke finally settled, Eleanor collapsed to her knees, trembling, alive. The house was silent, empty in a way that felt final. She closed her grandmother's journal gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she rose, stepping back into the quiet halls of the mansion she finally understood and finally owned. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories.